Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss how the explosion of big data is being addressed in government programs. With me today on the show are Zach Goldstein, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at Noaa, Dave Bottom, the Director of Information Technology Services at NGA, Jeanne Holm, the Evangelist for Data.Gov at GSA, Tom Soderstrom, the Chief Technology Officer at NASA JPL, Chris Steele, Chief Solutions Architect at Software AG Government Solutions, Mercedes Westcott, the Vice President, Public Sector, Cloudera Government Solutions, and Michael Conlin, the CTO and Strategist at HP Enterprise Services. Let's talk about big data and things are going. Let's start with you, Zach, over at Noaa. I know when we think of Noaa and all the data you guys deal with, I'm sure it's a big issue over there. Can you give us some examples of how big data is impacting programs and strategies at Noaa?
So, thanks, Jim.
Sure.
Noaa is a big data agency.
Absolutely.
As we like to say when we describe our mission of science, service, and stewardship is very broad, from the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean floor. We have missions that span that entirety. Public counts on us to deliver relevant and accurate information in a timely manner. It's critical to protecting life and property. We spend a lot of money on IT. It generates a lot of data, $1 billion annually on IT, 112 different information systems. We generate big data from lots of sources. 122 Doppler radars, 17 satellites on orbit, 8 networks of buoys, 1,042 stations, 200 tide gauges, 2 operational and 3 research supercomputers. We can't do anything in Noaa without doing it with big data. We have to generate it rapidly. Sure. We have to do it securely. We use it not only to protect life and property, but for climate modeling, mapping the ocean floor, mapping ocean currents, predicting the course of an oil spill. Some numbers, 3.5 billion observations a day are ingested into our high-performance computing. We have to secure it. We have to move it around. We leverage it. The newest thing we have, which I'll talk about later, is not only how can we use big data to better protect life and property, but how can we use big data to enable it to be used by others to promote the American economy. Yeah. And I'll leave that as a teaser for later.
No, that's an excellent point. I know back in the reinventing government days, we looked at all the data being collected by satellite, and we looked at the agencies collected and found out that the actual agency collecting it was using a small fraction of the data, but the data was immensely important to other people. So that's a very good point. Dave Bottom, how about at NGA? What are some examples of how big data is impacting program strategies at your agency?
Oh, thanks, Jim.
Sure.
Well, first off, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, we're both a member of the intelligence community and also a combat support agency. So the way we're approaching big data, of course, is to use it and leverage it in order to deliver better intelligence for our decision makers. And those decision makers run the gamut from policymakers, certainly here in town, to warfighters, to first responders. So there's a lot of disparate customer base that's using our information. And so some examples, I think, first off is certainly the explosion in sensors, right? So like Zach at Noaa, we've been in the remote sensing business for an awfully long time from a space and air standpoint, but look at the sensors that are out there now in terms of what's being proliferated. So how do we leverage that information in order to deliver more accurate and actionable intelligence is certainly the challenge for NGA moving forward.
Yeah. All that machine data that's being generated that can be integrated now to produce valuable information.
So how is that impacting us? So it's really caused us to go back and relook in terms of what we're leveraging and where we innovate. So the way we've treated IT, both from a mission and corporate standpoint, is delivering systems, right? But that's not really where the advantage is. We want to leverage much more industry solutions that are out there, and really where we want to innovate is in how we understand the data that we're looking at. So that's really where we're targeting our innovation. Terrific,
well said. I like that a lot. Hey, Michael Conlin over at HP Enterprise Services. How are you guys? Or can you give us some examples of how big data is impacting your strategies and your strategies to work with your government customers?
Yeah, happy to do that. Interestingly enough, our CEO, Meg Whitman, was in town just recently doing an executive roundtable with some government execs, including some of the guys here on the panel. Cool. The very same question came up. And she was talking about the fact that there's a lot of focus on the inflow of data because we have employees that need access to information right now to meet customer expectations. But then you have the outflow of data as well, and it's really easy to overlook the outflow of data, the accidental outflow. And so a lot of our attention has been on the generational issues because there's a whole generation of workers who don't understand necessarily the need for caution with outflow of data. So a lot of effort around setting guidelines for what's acceptable data to share and not share, what's acceptable messages to send and not send, what's an acceptable form of engagement and what's not, so that we are respectful of customers, including government customers, information and their own desire to control that information. So a lot of guidelines, a lot of structure around people in this world.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. In fact, just part of I chaired an AFCEA Homeland Security Conference a little while back, and we had FEMA on there talking, and they actually were talking about that same thing. That they've got this need for incoming data to get to the first responders, but then they also have a major requirement to get data back out. Large amounts of data. So it's interesting you bring that up. Jeanne Holm over at GSA. How is big data impacting program strategies for you?
Well, I think Data.Gov is actually, its existence is due to big data and to open data. So it's an open government initiative, and it federates 500,000 different data resources from 175 different agencies. So the agencies represented here on the panel and those of your listeners, they're all represented in Data.Gov. We organize that information around 20 different categories, topics, communities of practice. In fact, yesterday we launched our latest community, which was on climate. So there was a lot of activity at the White House as we launched new data sets from our friends at Noaa and NASA, actually.
Zach probably knows something about that.
Related to looking at climate change and issues around coastal flooding and inundation particularly. The other thing around government agencies really looking at big data that GSA really understands well is creating efficiencies within and between agencies. So sharing that data, making it accessible to other agencies, looking at duplication efforts and trying to sort of avoid those, as well as really looking at the efficiencies of the way in which we provision our own services. So when we think about things like public buildings that GSA manages, looking at the energy use of those public buildings, finding better ways of monitoring and managing that, the sensors that we've been starting to speak about, all of that embedded within the buildings lets us be more efficient in the use of taxpayer dollars.
Right. Hey, cool. No pun intended. Amazing the uses. I wonder what comes after big data. I mean, we just came up with the term big data. When is big data, when it grows, what do we start calling huge data? I don't know. We'll get there later. Chris Steele, Software AG. Tell us a little, Chris, examples how big data is impacting program strategies for you and how you support your customer base.
So we've seen big data impacting both our commercial and federal sectors. And what we've done is we've created a new product pillar called Fast Big Data. So we're really focusing on two areas of big data. There's big data in motion and there's big data at rest. We think that big data in motion is one of those underutilized areas that we're going to see a lot more interest in. So when we're talking about first responders, being able to see that data in real time, to be able to act on it while it's still relevant. We recently acquired a company called Apama. They have a complex event processing tool that we think will be used to help us correlate all these different big data real-time streams to be able to analyze and take actions within real time. On the other side, with big data at rest, if you look at your Hadoop clusters and stuff, what we're doing is we're trying to optimize those. So we acquired another company called Terracotta that has an in-memory processing product that allows you to take and store massive amounts of data within memory. So again, you can, instead of swapping out the disk and running the analysis over a long period of time, you can start to do it within, within milliseconds.
Right.
And those are our two product focuses.
Wow, I've said before on the show, we're approaching a time in the world where decision-making time is approaching zero in terms of the amount of time you have to make decisions these days. And I think you're right on in terms of the way you guys are preparing for that kind of world. Mercedes Westcott over Cloudera, can you tell us a little bit, Mercedes, about how examples maybe of how big data is impacting programs at Cloudera?
Yes, thank you, Jim.
Sure.
So what we're seeing with our public sector, our data-driven, information-driven public sector and commercial clients too, is a change in the way they manage their data. So increasingly, we're seeing agencies make data the center of their government operations. Mm-hmm. So what this means is this new architecture, this ecosystem of technologies now becomes a secure landing zone for all of the agency's data. So all kinds of data, structured and unstructured, in its full fidelity original format, and it can be kept actively and cost-effectively maintained for any period of time. So data no longer has to be archived to tape or SAN, where it is in essence dead, and it can be kept active and queryable. So agencies can now bring their analytic workloads to this enterprise data hub infrastructure, and it can be maintained with strong data governance. So data lineage, they can know where the data came from, when it arrived, who touched it, how it was transformed, and all done within one ecosystem.
Yeah, terrific, terrific. I think it's exciting times. Big data and cloud and everything else going on is some exciting things. Tom Soderstrom, Chief Technology Officer over at NASA. Tom, tell us a little bit from your perspective, some examples of how big data is impacting program strategies at NASA, JPL.
Sure. NASA has been known as the big data people. And it's been, if you look at success, it's past success is a predictor, and past success is also an inhibitor. So part of what we're doing is we're learning new technology, and that's a really big deal. Big data is way overhyped, and that's a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. Because all of the venture capital is flowing into startups, and they come up with new ways of visualizing data, for instance.
Right.
So how it's impacting program strategies is really what Mercedes said. It's the data becomes the center, mm-hmm. not the processing. So what we're looking at is we have hundreds and hundreds of petabytes already. And we are in about a month or so, unless there's another delay, we're going to launch something called Opals. Mm-hmm. And Opals is really laser comm to space. So right now, the pipe that's inhibiting us is radio frequency. We can only pump so much data in, even with our big antenna.
Right.
It's going to increase 100 to 1,000-fold, and we're already overflowing. So our normal traditional way is not going to work. So we're looking at cloud. So for program strategies, cloud is the number one thing for us. Mm-hmm. So also something we call dark data. And what dark data is, it's all of the data. Data tends to be siloed and stovepipe today.
Sure.
And a science mission will think of their data. The engineers will think of their data.
Right.
But we've never been able to look at the dark data that's in between them, or dark data that we never even knew they existed before. Mm-hmm. So our strategy really is about rapid prototyping now. It's about trying this new technology, the new mindset. We have a data scientist. We're hiring in data scientists in each department. We believe that there isn't one data scientist, there is a business data scientist, an IT data scientist, et cetera.
Right.
And they form a team to look at this dark data to now move the processing, as Mercedes said, to the data. And we can get very, very rapid insights.
Wow, interesting. Very good.
So I'll do a teaser about startup mentality. I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks. Good points there. Let's talk about, we talked about in general big data. How about a specific program? Could we cite a specific program perhaps that comes to mind that you think is, let's start this time with Jeanne Holm over GSA. Jeanne, could you cite a specific program where big data is offering some real opportunities for your agency?
Sure. So again, GSA really provides the federation of data from across cities, counties, states, and the federal government. Mm-hmm. So I always always like to think of the stories of what people are actually doing with that, because we think of it as the fuel for innovation for the American economy. And so when we look at what people are doing with government data in private sector, and as Tom mentioned, in startups, we look at organizations like the Climate Corporation. So this is a group of a couple hundred folks who've grown a small company that looks at helping American farmers to predict whether or not they need to take out insurance on their crops. So they look at a huge amount of Noaa data, looking at weather predictions. They look at USDA on crop viability based on soil and a variety of other factors that we can get back from NASA imagery. And they put all this together to help farmers make really smart, practical day-to-day solutions and choices about what they're going to fund. And what we found is that it's so successful. Monsanto just bought that company for $1 billion.
Oh, wow.
So we're seeing big data
Somebody
make a
sees
big
ROI
difference.
there.
Yeah, it's a good ROI. So big data makes a big difference for people actually trying to use it to help people make day-to-day decisions, whether that's for social good, civic engagement, or for new business startups across the country.
Wow, terrific. Great example. Dave Bottom, how about NGA? Can you cite a specific program maybe where you're seeing big data is going to make a big difference?
Sure, Jim. So when you take a look at NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, we're using big data in a couple different ways.
Okay.
So the approach from our mission statement is know the Earth, show the way, understand the world. So the opportunity for NGA with leveraging big data is understanding the world. And
Okay.
it wouldn't surprise you, being a geospatial intelligence agency, that we're approaching it from a geospatial context.
Sure.
And when you look at big data, really what that big data is at the end of the day is activity. Something has happened. So the way we're approaching that is, and everything happens somewhere and at some time. Our key program for bringing all that together is something we call Map of the World. And the idea is to anchor those observations, those activities, to a particular point on the Earth. And the focus of the program is to convey that understanding, derive understanding from that, from geospatial time and location, to move decision space to the left. You touched on it, that decision space is approaching zero. As an intelligence agency, our job at the end of the day is actually to move that decision space to the left, right? So increase the time for, no matter who the decision maker is, to increase that decision space. So, approaching that big data challenge and leveraging those opportunities from a geospatial context is what we're attempting to do with Map of the World.
Wow, terrific, terrific, great stuff. Tom Soderstrom, what do you think? Can you identify a specific program at JPL maybe that you think is really making a difference for NASA?
Yeah, we are, all programs are using big data. And the big thing for us, and I'm going to give a specific example, which is unusual, you won't have thought of it. It's end-to-end life cycle. So what we're trying to do is to every stage learn something, and then we move that processing up towards the spacecraft eventually. Even the spacecraft will have too much data. It can't get it back to Earth, even with a laser comm. So we're probing at each one. And one of the most interesting one, I thought, was Mars Science Laboratory. Curiosity is up there running around, discovering that the components of life were present at Mars. So how can you innovate on an already mission that's already up there? So we took, they get lots of telemetry down, and the data is usually stovepiped. So we said, how can we take this new technology, startup, and big data and do something with it? So what we did is, how do you analyze your stocks on the stock market? You go to finance.google.com and you compare stocks. So we said, could we do the same thing with data streams? So we did. So now they go in, use the same technology, and compare different types of data streams visually on the web browser, and are discovering things we never saw before.
Wow, neat.
Yeah, so it's combining now with other types of data, the dark data, that we can get insights in seconds that we couldn't get before.
Wow, terrific.
And
Sounds
that's
great.
just one example.
Yeah. Zach Goldstein, what do you think, Zach? Can you name a specific program that you guys are working that you think is making a big difference?
Specific program that we hope to make a big difference.
Okay.
And it's the newest thing we've got. And I'm so glad that Tom at NASA talked about his stovepipes, and Jeanne at GSA talked about the use of our data by the climate community, because when you take those two ideas and put them together and combine them with an agency that spends a lot of money on big data, but primarily to tell people when to run and how to stay safe,
Right.
you end up having, if you excuse the pun, a perfect storm.
Yeah, right.
How do we do this? How do we only because of the dynamic that Tom just described about data being in silos and generating massive amounts of data, but for a very specific use, doing research and development supercomputer runs.
Right.
The data stays where it is. But we have this big opportunity if you can expose that data to the outside world, but that's not free.
Right.
So what we're talking about is unique business models. We have a request for information where we're seeking partners with innovative ideas that can work with Noaa to establish a means for extracting all this valuable data from our stovepipes, exposing it to those who can make money on it, and generate jobs, generate innovative uses, creative uses, and do it in such a way that the data is available rapidly, scalable, it's in the cloud, all without impacting our mission-critical operations. And the initiative is still in its infancy. It's still in its infancy. We have the RFI out. We believe this partnership could allow our vast volumes to be put in the cloud and co-located with analytical resources that others can access. The idea behind it being a new business model is that it needs to be self-sustaining.
Right.
So that those who make money on the data can fund the extraction and access and all the other things that need to be done to the data to make money on the data, and all doing that without raising our cost. And still, our commitment, though, is that if the data is there in its native form and it's available for free, that part would remain so. So we're not talking about changing the way we distribute our information today. Right. What we're talking about is coming up with a mechanism to drive the American economy and the uses that other people have alluded to, but without distracting us from our main mission.
Terrific. Sounds great. And I want to hear from our industry guests on this question, too. But first, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik, here with Zach Goldstein from Noaa, Dave Bottom from NGA, Jeanne Holm from GSA, Tom Soderstrom from NASA JPL, Chris Steele from Software AG Government Solutions, Mercedes Westcott from Cloudera Government Solutions, and Michael Conlin from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking big data. When we went to break, we were talking about specific programs where big data is making a big difference. And we heard from our government guests. Let's start this time with Mercedes Westcott. Can you give us an idea, like a specific program you're aware of that you think is really making a difference here?
Sure, Jim. Well, we have two classes of clients. We have those clients that are using big data to gain operational efficiencies, saving money and time. And then we have clients that are using big data to do cutting-edge analytics. To meet mission challenges. And in the first class of customer, there is a program, the DOTIS App Engine, that uses shared infrastructure and data sets, uses a data hub to provide visibility across and into data that would otherwise be siloed. So that makes it easier for users to identify what kind of data might be of value to the mission. In the second class of customer, we have DARPA and supporting agencies that do use our software with sophisticated modeling to help identify veterans who opt in who might be at risk for suicide.
Oh, wow.
Those are two examples.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Chris Steele at Software AG. Chris, can you give us maybe an example of a program, specific program that you think is going to make a difference or is making a difference?
One of the programs that we've seen in the commercial sector is fraud detection. So what used to take over 45 minutes to analyze a credit card transaction, we can now do within milliseconds.
Wow, cool.
So in real time, when you're at that bank and you swipe the card, we can tell whether or not this is a fraudulent transaction, and we can stop it right there, saving billions.
Wow, that's great. Having had my identity stolen once, I'm all for that program because I've been through the pain of that. Michael Conlin over at HP Enterprise Services, is there a specific program, Michael, that you would like to identify maybe that you think is going to make a big difference?
Yeah, I would. So let me start with the principle that guides the program. So my rule of thumb is, in this new world, data trumps process. We're all used to a world where with a real worship of process discipline, but in this world, the data trumps process. And I think some of Tom's remarks just before the break spoke to that issue. I serve DHS, and as you know, a significant portion of their mission is around cybersecurity. So you ask, what does HP know about cybersecurity that could help DHS? We run a very large enterprise. Our corporate website, www.hp.com, gets 300 million hits a day.
Wow.
From enterprises or consumers, you name it. An enormous volume of traffic. Now, one of the significant vectors of malware attacks is the so-called domain name service, or DNS. So for our site, we process 10 billion DNS service requests a day. This is all background stuff that resolves addresses into real destinations. So 10 billion a day. That volume is so large, you just can't deal with it, right? It's so much that one person, one team of people cannot understand, analyze what those patterns are. So we went to HP Labs. They invented some tools that let us filter out 95% of that data and get down to just the subset that matters. Put some visualization tools over top of it so you can understand what the data is telling you, and that enables our cybersecurity people to deal only with a subset of the data that really matters. So now we turn around and we ask ourselves, how do we bring that kind of innovation to the folks at DHS who are working every day to secure our homeland, and especially against cybersecurity threats? So we do have an awful lot of insights in managing large sums of data and getting the meaningful insights out. And it's a matter of carrying that into the federal government sector and helping them take advantage of those lessons learned.
Terrific. Well said. Good stuff there. We've kind of already touched on some of the benefits in our regular conversation, but I'm wondering maybe putting out there, what are some other, the big benefits you see coming to your agency that'll come out of all these programs? And Zach, what do you think at Noaa? What are some of the major benefits of all these programs going on around big data?
So the benefit of the latest program that I was talking about before the break to Noaa is that we're going to get, as a byproduct of the access by the American economy, we'll get better tools, we'll get better access ourselves. But the real benefit is not going to be accrued by Noaa. It's going to be accrued by all the people who use the data. Right. And the opportunities are mind-boggling. 1/3 of our gross domestic product is related to climate-sensitive industries in the United States. We talked about an opportunity earlier before the break. The cost of getting that data is high, but if that can be reduced, you can promote the economy. Our expectation is that the public-private partnerships that we seek to help get our big data out there and being used will enable, they'll be able to scale, they'll be able to surge rapidly, removing the government infrastructure itself as the bottleneck to the pace of innovation to use that data. Right. As much as we have to have our infrastructure to generate our forecasts, to generate our maps, if all you want to do is get to the data and don't care about the process, if it's all about the data, you don't want us to be in the way. Right. So the real power of this initiative is to get us out of the way, get the power of American industry to take our data and make it available for scientific advancement, for innovation, for new industries, and as a byproduct, and this is not a small thing, it also will help Noaa to advance the Presidential Executive Order 13642, which is much more commonly known as making open and machine-readable the new default for government information.
Wow, terrific. Terrific, good. Tom Soderstrom over NASA, what are some of the other benefits you see coming out of all these programs?
Boy, do we have an hour? I think big data, for us, 6 years ago, cloud computing was the big driver. Sure. And we realized those benefits. Big data is the big driver now. And what Zach said is absolutely right on. It's if we can get out of the way and get the citizens to help analyze the science, that's a big win for us. So right now we're focusing on hackathons, we're focusing on crowdsourcing, but how do you get the crowd to participate? you have to make the data available in some way that they want to see it. Our data is usually in a format that only other scientists can like.
Yeah.
So we put the data in a JSON format, and we had a 16-hour hackathon, and we got wonderful visualizations of data from 7 satellites by the crowd, mostly college kids.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
Terrific.
So I think that's one. The other one is going from a culture of anecdotal decisions to data-driven decisions, where we can query the data right away. So self-service analytics
Right.
is the key to us.
Yeah,
So
cool. Very cool. Dave Bonham, NGA, what do you think? Are some other benefits you can add to this discussion? Things
Sure.
come to mind?
I mean, I think if we get the big data thing right, at the end of the day, for NGA, that leads to better intelligence for our customers. So Tom touched on it. I mean, we tend to approach things data in stovepipes, and what my analogy there is when you in the intelligence context, when you look at that, it's 3 blind men and the elephant. Depending on what data you're looking at, is you have a different understanding of the problem. So if we get the data integration right, we're going to convey a much more holistic understanding of the problem from all of the data that's out there. So I see that as a huge benefit and a huge step forward in the big data world.
Absolutely. Well said. Jeanne Holm over GSA, anything you can add, other benefits you see coming out of this to get out to the discussion here?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think it's really great points everybody's made, but also really improved in speed of decision making for every government employee out there. So everybody can have better informed decisions by having access to the data they need. The other thing I think, too, is to really look at transparency. So we really need to open up not just the data from government, but the context behind it. And so I think by using open source technologies like we do on Data.Gov, all of our software is open source. All of the comments and support come in directly from the public on GitHub. And all of that just makes it more transparent, both how we do it so that we can do it more efficiently, and also using the data behind it to expose that to the American public.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. This is, what I like about the discussion is everything's being viewed as to how do we use this for others, not just internally for us. Michael Conlin, what do you think? Anything you can add to this benefit discussion that you see coming?
Absolutely. So a lot of the benefits we see are coming in connecting different forms of data together. We have these traditional, we call them systems of record, which do a lot of the processing that keeps the enterprise running. And then we have all these new systems of engagement, which is where a lot of the big data is coming from, and it is highly unstructured data. Sure. A number of different formats. And it is in the intersection of the cloud that Tom talked about, with mobility, with social networking, that is generating the sheer volume of big data, but you still got to connect it to other data to get value out of it. So as a specific example, our SunGuard team was working with a Medicare Medicaid customer, integrating some of the structured and unstructured data around services and billing. They were able to identify $1 billion worth of fraudulent requests for payments that were subsequently recovered directly from the appropriate parties, and they were able to identify and prevent $4 billion worth of fraudulent payments that would have gone out the door. So it's ahead of the actual event, right? So a total $5 billion worth of benefits just in a single space of fraud detection for one organization. Pretty good benefits.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great story there. Chris Steele, what do you think? Is there some benefits you see here that you can add to this discussion?
Well, to reiterate what all the panelists have said, it really comes down to decision making and being able to get to the point where we can take these massive amounts of data, and all of our agencies are drowning in data these days. We've got petabytes. To be able to harness that data, to bring it to a point where we can make real-time decisions, and to be able to add context to those decisions, to pull in feeds such as social media to be able to say, what is it out there in the country? How does everybody throughout the nation respond to this Crimean crisis? How can I take that sentiment, layer it upon my decision to be able to make a more informed decision?
Well said. Good relevant, time-relevant example there. Mercedes Westcott, what do you think on the benefits here? Is there anything comes to mind you can add to the discussion here in terms of benefits we'll see?
Sure. I think as people and projects engage increasingly in using big data and using enterprise data hubs with open source at the core, and as they implement operational efficiencies, I think they'll start to to see that they can bring even more information and more programs into the fold, and even include external information sources in their decision making. So this will give them the ability to find new insights and solve previously unsolvable problems and challenges for the mission, and it will help them to see things in new ways that they can help their constituents, be it the warfighter or other agencies or U.S. citizens.
Wow, great. Man, I love doing the shows. It gets me so optimistic and excited about all the great things that are coming down the road, you know. Plus, you guys all keep me smart. I like that, too. Let's talk now. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the hard things, the things that are difficult to get done, the things that are sort of in the way, I guess. Start with you, David, NGA. What are some of the challenges you face day to day as you try to get these programs moving forward?
Yeah, Jim, I lump it into two large categories, and,
Okay.
and actually, this is a hard question to answer because there are a number of challenges. But the first challenge I think that technology can help us with is what I call the large data to big data problem, right?
Okay.
So, from an NGA standpoint, working with airborne imagery and satellite imagery, we've been in the large data business for a long time. So large files, specific, that have specific properties, and if you correlate that against big data, which is smaller files that are in Hadoop, and Mercedes touched on that. How do we transition that, right? So, and we're all carrying legacy
Right.
architectures. So how do we transition those capabilities into an open source world, right? So how do we work the code rewrite and
Right.
make sure that we can minimize cost there to
Right.
get that integration? So that's the first set of challenges in that category. The second is really all about tradecraft, right? So we're changing the way that we're analyzing information. Chris touched on it with the discussion about process was king. Now data is king. So how do we change our tradecraft around that, particularly in two categories? One is analysis. So how do we change our analytic processes and capabilities to accommodate big data? And the second challenge is what I call conveying that understanding to decision makers.
Yeah.
We've been in a static product. I mean, our favorite way is PowerPoint to
Right.
convey information in the written word.
Absolutely.
But how do you convey understanding in terms of big data that's really more activities and motion to
Sure.
convey an understanding more quickly?
Yeah, it's disrupting the status quo, which causes some change, which causes some nervousness from time to time, that kind of thing. Jeanne, Holm, what do you think? What are some of the hard things, the challenges out there?
Well, I think one of the challenges is one that we've just started to overcome, which is the change in agencies to move from securing data and keeping it closed and safe to opening it up for all these great ideas that we've just talked about. And so earlier last year, President Obama put out the executive order that Zach mentioned, which was that open is the new default for all data. But on the other side of that is the challenge. So all of that is great, but we also need to protect citizens' private data. We certainly don't want individual IRS records being made open and accessible in a JSON file, nor do we want to open things that might harm national security. So I think that there's an ongoing education within the government
Right.
that is really looking at this balance between openness and privacy, and really trying hard to make that as clear-cut a decision as possible.
Yeah, very well put. Good issues there. We had sort of the same thing with cloud. I mean, what can we put to cloud? What do we have the trust factor there, and so forth. Zach, what do you think? What are some of the tough things, the challenges, the constraints you got to get over to get where you want to go?
So I put our challenges into two categories, what we have to do internally and what we have to do to advance the use of our data by others. So internally, we still have the problems of lots of data, have to move it around, have to secure it. So we make investments in our 10 gigabyte national network to move the data. We focus on data quality and usefulness, metadata. But the challenges on the other side are formidable, and that's why we're asking for ideas, and we're going to be continuing to evaluate those ideas. How do you have an interface that allows massive use of the data that we generate without impacting the performance inside of Noaa so that we can continue increasing warning times?
Right.
How do you make sure that you comply with the regulations on data quality as you lose control of the data? How do you govern the initiative? How do you measure its success? It's not simply about surely making data available. It's got to be about the use to which that data is put.
Right.
And the biggest challenge, which is why I start off by saying a few moments ago about looking for new business models, is how do you do the deal? This isn't the kind of thing where we're going to say, okay, here's $1 billion, go build this and make it available to the public. The government doesn't do this that often. And so we're looking for ideas on how we do this legally, efficiently, and fairly.
Yeah, terrific. Well done. And Tom, I want to hear from you and our industry guests too, but first we need to take another short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Zach Goldstein from Noaa, Dave Bottom from MGA, Jeanne Holm from GSA, Tom Soderstrom from NASA, Chris Steele from Software AG Government Solutions, Mercedes Westcott from Cloudera Government Solutions, and Michael Conlin from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking big data. We're talking challenges. We left off, Tom. Start with you, Tom Soderstrom. What are some of the challenges you face every day in trying to move these programs forward?
I think one of the key challenges, no surprise, is big data equals big budget. At least that's the thought. It's not necessarily true. So the process of why should we worry, why should we change? Big data is going to cost us a lot of big money. So the way we get around it is to prototype it, probe at it, try and show value. So we believe in not return on investment, but return on attention, where if you can show value early with little money, then you can get the investment for the big money. Yeah. That's one. Skill set is another. Trying to combine structured and unstructured data, it's a new skill set. Combining the new technology flowing in with what we're doing is important. And lastly, how do we tell the story? We've told the story for the same way for a long time. Now we can use mobile devices, we can use augmented reality, we can use Google Glass, et cetera, to tell the story accessing the data in the cloud. It's a very new way of thinking. And it's exciting, but it's a change.
Right. Michael Conlin, what do you think? What are some of the tough things out there, some of the challenges to get these programs where they got to go?
So we have a little catchphrase when we talk about big data. First, we point out that 80% of all data is now unstructured data. And that brings with it some of the challenges we've heard about. There's an enormous velocity, there's an enormous volume, and there's an enormous variety. And the variety is the challenge I'd like to just focus in for a moment. If you think about the old IT, we knew where data was. We knew that the name was there and a date was there and an address was there. But in the modern world, we don't have that luxury. So you think about a LinkedIn update, a Facebook status, a photo on Pinterest, a music file on iTunes. You think about a video on YouTube, and you think about integrating all of that and somehow drawing content from that. That's a big challenge. And one of the places where we're helping people manage that challenge is with respect to creating a new early warning system. It's actually a first-of-a-kind early warning system for threatened species. It's called HP Earth Insights. And it monitors 16 forest sites around the world where we bring together on a routine basis 3 terabytes of critical biodiversity information with over 1.4 million photos and more than 3 million climate measures that we get from our friends over here. And we're able to help scientists spin through that data and get real-time insights. As an example, some of the 275 species that we're helping scientists look at, 22% of them, 60 species, are now known to be significantly decreasing in their population with respect to controlling all of those other variables. And so now we know where we have to focus, the scientists know where they have to focus their effort to protect biodiversity. And that insight comes from that ability to overcome the variety and bring all of those things together.
Oh, well said. Good thoughts there. Very good thoughts. What I'd like to do in all the shows in our last segment is talk a little bit about the future and have everyone a chance to give their version of where this is all going, what the futures look like. Let's just work our way back to me down the table. Let's start with Tom Soderstrom over at NASA JPL. Tom, share a vision for the future. Where's this all going to go? What's it going to mean to us down the road?
So I think we all share the goal of getting the data accessible to people who care. So part of the future is that everybody will have access to NASA's data on their mobile devices at any time. Not only that, but they'll be able to participate and do citizen science. That'd be one. From a program perspective, we look at data at the entire life cycle. We learn on the ground. We push that processing up to the spacecraft where it can do its own triage. So big data is kind of filtering down. Another one is that we have a data scientist in every organization. It becomes a discipline, just like we have technologists in each organization. Another one is that we get new insight from data we already have. So could we, for instance, create a new mission, a virtual mission, and just look at the data we already have and launch fewer spacecraft, because that's difficult. And finally, I think it's a data-driven culture, smarter decisions, faster, and where the data becomes the system of engagement itself. So system of record and system of engagement almost merges, and that's by getting insight to all the data at once.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Mercedes Westcott, what's your crystal ball look like? Where's this all going down the road?
I think the upcoming depth and transparency of mission data will empower agencies to accept just the deltas of change, moving away from the status quo of asking for full data sets, and allow them to perform their own analysis on those data sets. Agencies will change culturally and politically for the better, I think, as well, to be able to believe and rely on the results from others because of this visibility and transparency in the data. And I think they'll achieve more efficient collaboration of thinking. And finally, I think the ability to extract pertinent information from unstructured data will increasingly get better.
Yeah, absolutely. That theme's come out a couple times. Chris Steele, Software AG, what's it look like down the road for you? Where's this all going?
I think the paradigm is going to continue to move more towards event stream processing, where instead of taking all of this massive amounts of data and storing it on disk, we build better tools to be able to analyze it in real time, to be able to pick out, that needle in the haystack as it's flowing through the system. Add on that, we will be able to better integrate across all of the different agencies to pull together new data sets that have value for the citizens, to be able to make that publicly available so that within my context, I have the data that's most relevant to me.
Yeah, very good. I like that needle in the haystack, too. Someone said to me the other day that big data and analytics are getting so good that pretty soon we're going to be finding needles in stacks of needles. Jeanne Holm, BSA, what's it look like down the road for you? What's the future?
Well, I think it's a very positive future, and one that really looks at embracing the fact that we have sensors everywhere, whether those are smartphones, smart cars, or smart people. As Tom alluded to, talking about citizen scientists, the idea is really how do we take all of that data and pull it together to be meaningful? And I think part of that is simulation, visualization, and virtualization. Be able to create not only our understanding of historical facts and why things happened a certain way, but really being able to predict that into the future. So putting the big data together with the big models and the big ideas are the ways in which we can predict how the future is going to unfold for us.
Terrific. I like that. I like that a lot. Michael Conlin, what's it look like for you down the road, Mike?
So where we are today is we're in the tools are cool stage of the world. Everybody wants to play with the tools. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of activity, a lot of chatter about the tools. We think the tools are going to fade into the background. We think that the future experience of big data is going to be about delivering actionable insights that are directly related to mission outcomes, direct enablers of mission outcomes, and we're going to deliver those in real time, often on a predictive basis. And that world gets to be very different. I'll give you a quick example.
Sure.
Our NASCAR friends run major race events. Now, every one of those events, they get 1 million social networking posts. They get 565,000 posts on the day. They get 6,000 tweets a minute, all from their viewers. And what happens for the NASCAR producers is they have the ability to see that. They have the ability to see the trends and predict what people are going to want to see, and they can feed more content to raise viewer satisfaction and stickiness in the event. Now turn around and bring that into any kind of government interaction with citizens, and you get the same kind of understanding of how to improve that citizen service experience in real time. And the tools are in the background.
Yeah, very good. I like that analogy. Dave Bottom, what do you think? What's it look like for you down the road? Where's this all going?
So just to follow up on Mike's points, from an NGA standpoint, we are a visual agency, so I like the question about vision. And we think that in the future, we're going to need to deliver what we call an immersive intelligence experience. And what do I mean by that? It goes back to the tools fading into the background, the data being static. We really want to deliver an experience that's visual and that's interactive. So as our customers can interact with the data, not just be given a static intelligence product. So delivering that immersive experience in a visual way. very, very different than how we're delivering information today. So that's how we're dealing with the future, because our customers, but by and large, are very sophisticated when it comes to geospatial, right? So we all use geospatial information. We're all used to having it when we need it, where we need it. And I think that expectation is only going to increase. So,
yeah, I agree. I think with the next generation coming into the workforce too, their expectations
Are
are going to be a lot different than our generations, and they're not going to want to worry about the tools and the infrastructure. They're just going to want to worry about the data and getting the information they need when they need it. You're exactly right. Zach Goldstein, what do you think? What's it look like to you, Zach? Where's this all going down the road?
So on the inside, better and more confidence in warnings and predictions from space weather to the health of the ocean. But on the outside, we're going to use the information that we're gleaning from the request for information, determine our next steps, and we're hopeful and expecting that new partnerships that we'll engage in will enable us to accelerate the economic growth that Noaa's big data feeds today.
Yeah, so that's well put. So you're actually looking. What came out in a lot of this discussion here today is just the fact that agencies and industry are not just looking internally at themselves, but they're looking at how it benefits the good of all, which is very interesting. Let me try to do some summaries here and some summarizing of our discussion. We talked about examples, and some of the things that jumped out at me is when we were talking about that you didn't think of, as people actually brought up. We're talking here about saving lives and property safety and being able to predict things that potentially can change the course of individual behaviors in order to protect individuals. We talked about better decision making. We hit that issue of a world where decision making is approaching time equals zero, so that people are going to be instantaneously receiving the information they need to make those decisions. We talked about the issues around so many sensors that are out there and the need to integrate sensors. And I think we alluded to the fact that we don't want separate management processes for each of the sensors. We're going to have to find ways to bring this together. The other thing that came out from all of you, either directly or indirectly, was the sharing concept. The idea that the stovepipes are no longer going to be the way we view things, that we got to, I think, Tom, you brought out that black space idea, data. Yeah, which was a new concept that came out. Some of the specific programs, the ones around climate, were exciting, and things that can be done there. I like that idea of the map of the world, to create an understanding of incidents that are going on around the world, just to learn more about things happening around the world. And then I heard about the Partnership for Jobs, which I think is kind of exciting too, that if you can use big data with partnerships and you try to get input from industry, you can potentially use that to actually drive the economy and improve the economy. Benefits right across the board. We heard sharing. We heard being able to identify threats. Elimination of fraud and fraud detection, something that I think is very hot right now, the identity theft issue being what it is. I think big data being able to address that particular threats is going to be big. And the thing here that came across too was data is now going to trump process. It's all about the data, and if we focus on all about the data. I heard transparency mentioned many, many times, and then that sort of demarcation between how much transparency versus the issue of security and privacy and protection of personal information. But where can we make those decisions about what can be gotten out there in a more transparent way? Challenges are numerous. I heard a lot of challenges around business processes. That issue of open versus secure. It's going to challenge cultures and agencies because things are going to have to be done differently. There's going to be compliance issues. Probably governance models will need to change. We heard money, which always is out there, and of course skills to do this. We've came up with a world where people know those nice relational databases with that nice structured data. Well, the data coming in isn't nice and structured like that anymore, so we're going to need to figure out the challenges of how do we integrate that structured and unstructured data. The future takes us to better data availability, better decision making, better government, and in what I come across with is some real exciting times. Let's do a few thank yous here. First of all, thanks to our panelists from taking time from your very, very busy schedules to come here and share your time with us. It's hopefully this proves to be sort of a knowledge-sharing event, and you know that old adage that none of us is as smart as all of us. Hopefully through these discussions we're all making each other a little bit more aware of some of the things. So thanks for taking your time. Thanks to the sponsors of the show. Without the sponsors, we don't have a show. So, thanks for supporting us in that way. Thanks to all the good people here at Federal News Radio and the amount of work they do to make these shows come across the way we need to. And most importantly, of course, thanks to the listening audience out there that tunes into the show each month. Hopefully, we are providing a service to the community in that aspect too, in helping by getting our word out, helps the community listening, help you in the government and help you in industry do the partnerships necessary to make these programs successful and move them forward. With that, I want to say thank you very much. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.